Hello and welcome to India's World. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani concluded a successful visit to India last week. There are indications that India is considering scaling up its security ties with Afghanistan, training Afghan defense forces as well as supplying military hardware. A batch of 3 Mi-25 helicopter gunships was supplied by India to Afghanistan in December 2015. This is a shift from India's primary focus in Afghanistan up to now of only providing development assistance. India has offered Afghanistan a $1 billion assistance package this time around. India is already Afghanistan's fifth largest donor, having provided development reconstruction assistance of $2 billion since 2001. To discuss the emerging India-Afghanistan ties, we have with us a very distinguished panel of experts. We have with us Ambassador Jayant Prasad. He was India's ambassador to Nepal, Algeria and Afghanistan, as well as permanent representative to the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. He is currently the Director General of IDSA, Institute of Defence Studies and Analysis. Ambassador Rakesh Sood, he was India's ambassador to Afghanistan and Nepal and permanent representative to the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. He is currently a distinguished fellow at Observer Research Foundation. And we have with us Ambassador Vivek Katju. He was India's ambassador to Afghanistan, Thailand and Myanmar. He handled the Afghanistan desk of the Foreign Office for a record number of 6 years. I welcome you gentlemen to this discussion. Jayant, let me begin with you. Would you say that a strategic convergence is emerging between India and Afghanistan, and India's deeper ties with Afghanistan are a result of that?
Definitely yes. Afghanistan was daring that it had 46 military partners that were part of the International Security Assistance Force, including the United States. When it started negotiating strategic partnership agreements with half a dozen of them, the Afghan leadership was clear and there was a consensus on it across the political spectrum that the first such arrangement should be with India. But it did not fructify in a really strategic partnership at the time when that agreement was signed, because the demands that Afghanistan made on us then were not fulfilled by the then government, which the present government is more forthcoming about. And therefore, I would say that the time is ripe and you can see signs of it. In this meeting between Prime Minister Mr. Modi and President Ashraf Ghani, the two governments have decided that the Strategic Partnership Council, which has to meet at the ministerial level, will have its first meeting soon.
Okay. Rakesh, so would you say that the Modi government's Afghanistan policy is not a continuation of the previous government's policy, but represents a break from the past?
To an extent it does, but at the same time I think it is useful to remember that when President Ashraf Ghani was elected, he had kind of put India-Afghanistan relations on the side while he concentrated on building up relationships with Pakistan. He made a number of gestures. He sent for the first time Afghan cadets to the Pakistan military training academy. He made the unprecedented gesture when he visited Pakistan to actually go to the GHQ to meet General Raheel Sharif, the Chief of Army Staff of Pakistan. And he was, perhaps in doing so, he was hoping that he could turn a new chapter between Afghanistan-Pakistan relationship. And he thought he could come to an understanding with both Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and the army chief. And in doing so, he made it quite clear that he was not pursuing the same kind of relationship with India that his predecessor had pursued. And I think after 2 years, he is quite disappointed. He has made his disappointment public, and to that extent he has now reassessed his policy. And I think the fact that the US is also withdrawing, in a sense that you saw that the election, 2014 election, was a highly contested election, and the National Unity Government was put together by the Obama-Kerry team, and the Obama-Kerry team now goes out by the end of this year. So I think that again is something which is forcing him to turn towards the region and towards India.
Okay. Vivek, so by providing military hardware, presumably including lethal hardware, isn't India going beyond the existing program of training Afghan military personnel? And what could be the reason for going beyond that?
Well, it's part of the India-Afghanistan strategic partnership agreement. And therefore, in a sense, we are not doing anything which is outside the parameters of the consensus that there should be between India and Afghanistan on strategic issues. The question is, if Ghani's shift, as Rakesh, he's mentioned the shift, but the real issue is if Ghani's shift is actually tactical or strategic. There are, to my mind, there are groups within Afghanistan who are firmly of the view that Pakistan will not change its hostility towards Afghanistan, and therefore there is a natural coincidence of interest between India and Afghanistan. However, because of Ghani's actions immediately after he had taken over as president, there is this large question that what would happen should Pakistan change course? Would he revert back and put India back in the fourth circle? Or will he maintain his present position? Let us also not forget that part of the reason that Ghani turned was also because of the intense pressure put on him from within his own national unity government. So it was a combination of pressure from within and disappointment in Islamabad and Pindi that has made Ghani turn so completely. And therefore, we'll have to be very cautious on this. But meanwhile, I think whatever openings we've got, we should welcome them and proceed with supply and not have the inhibitions which the UPA government showed.
Jayant, do you agree with Vivek? Because the Taliban have cautioned India against supplying any lethal weaponry to Afghan armed forces. And they've also suggested that the Taliban have done nothing in India. It's an internal issue of Afghanistan. So should India be willingly getting engaged in the Afghan civil war?
No, our supplying wherewithal and material to the Afghan army has got nothing to do. Taliban is a fringe element now in Afghanistan. It is got a constituency there, but its organizational and ideological links with Islam Pasand groups like Al-Qaeda are unbroken. Each time there has been a change of leadership after the death of Mullah Omar 27 months preceding the Murray talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government was made known.
Yep.
The leadership changes are all done by the Pakistan army. The people in charge today are members of the Haqqani network. They are closely integrated with the Taliban leadership today. We maintain our relationship with the Afghan people and the Afghan government. And Afghanistan has changed in 20 years. It's not 1995-96. Taliban is not strong enough even to overwhelm this weak government in Kabul, which has been left with an army which is very ill-equipped by its military partners. But even so, it has held together enough to keep away Taliban from provincial capitals and from Kabul. And therefore, the question is, are we going to have our policy determined from Islamabad, or are we going to pursue an independent policy?
Okay, fair enough. We need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again in a bit. Stay with us. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing deepening India-Afghanistan ties. Rakesh, to what extent would close military cooperation between Afghanistan and India worry Pakistan? Would Pakistan feel that it is being strategically encircled by India?
Yes, Pakistan has always maintained that Indian influence in Afghanistan will work to Pakistan's disadvantage. Now, why Pakistan has convinced itself of this is something much deeper, and but nonetheless, it is a fact that Rawalpindi believes that greater Indian influence in Afghanistan is to Pakistan's strategic disadvantage. And so far, America had been, in a sense, been sensitive to this particular aspect. I think there is also a shift in US perception. And to that extent, the opening that we have today in terms of really implementing the strategic partnership agreement both in terms of capacity building, which we've been doing, and adding up some military hardware to the package, is an opening which we should exploit.
Okay. Vivek, in pursuing India's strategic interests in Afghanistan, is there a recognition in Indian policy making circles that Pakistan also has non-negotiable strategic interests in Afghanistan?
Now, what are these? The first interest that Pakistan has shown is a desire to control Kabul's India policy, which no Afghan government has been willing to grant it, naturally. So, if this is how Pakistan defines its strategic interests, it is irrational. Yes, it has major interests, and the first interest ought to be, and many Pakistani believe this, is peace and stability in Afghanistan. It says that it is doing everything for this purpose, but in actual fact, by supporting the Taliban as it has done over the last 2 decades, it's doing just the reverse. So, interests, yes, but it's always a question of how you look at those interests. Now, one other point, which is which you had asked about whether India should supply military hardware and whether that constitutes a break. Let us not forget that even during the period of the Taliban rule, when India, like all other countries except for 3, recognized the Rabbani government as the legitimate government, and the UN did that too, India gave all kinds of support to that government, and that was perfectly valid because it was support to a recognized government.
Okay. Jayant, one analogy of Pakistan's relationship with Afghanistan that is often drawn is that it is similar to India's relationship with Nepal. Just as Nepal cannot do without India and China cannot replace India and Nepal, for that reason Afghanistan cannot afford to ignore Pakistan, and Pakistan will always have a role in Afghanistan's destiny.
The analogy is absolutely incorrect, pardon my saying that, because between Nepal and India, we have an open border. We give national treatment to Nepalese, 6 million of them, to live and work in India as they please. There are 2 major generals in the Indian army who hold Nepali passports, besides the other Gurkha soldiers in the regiment.
But Pakistan and Afghanistan also have an open border, same ethnicities live on both sides, they keep moving up and down.
But why do Afghan nationals choose to come? You know, when they came to the Indian embassy for visas, for example, I would try to talk them out of going to India, expend so much money, take their entire family for health checkups in these expensive Delhi hospitals. I tried always to talk them out of it. I said it was much easier for them to take a bus and go to Peshawar or go to anywhere in Pakistan and get treated. And they said that they had no faith in getting the right treatment in Pakistan, and that's why they wanted to come to India. No, I'm saying
strategic dependence is
no,
what
the
we're talking about.
strategic dependence. I'm giving you an illustration of the dynamic between the peoples. Now the Pakistan-Afghanistan relationship is a very complex one. 2/3 of the Pashtuns live in Pakistan and not in Afghanistan, and that's the crux of the problem of the Durand line. No Afghan leader, including Mullah Omar, would be willing to acknowledge with an open voice that they recognize this border. They see their natural frontier to Attock and to the Indus River. That's one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is the troubles that Pakistan creates for Afghanistan. You cannot vanquish terrorism and insurgency if you have support, sustenance and sanctuary given from the contiguity. This is something that Pakistan does negatively for Afghanistan. We have done no such negative thing. We don't send insurgents or bomb making material to Nepal. I mean, far from it, we do exactly the opposite. So the other problem in the dynamic between Afghanistan and Pakistan, you raised a very interesting question, is that given Pakistan's past behavior, to expect Pakistan to assist in the resolution of Afghanistan's internal problems is very, very difficult. But without Pakistan's assistance, it is impossible. That is the dilemma that the Afghan leaders face.
Okay. Rakesh, One of the things that leads to great dependency between Afghanistan and Pakistan is that Pakistan gives them access to warm water ports, and most of their sort of supplies would come from Pakistan. Now, how does access to Chabahar port in Iran change the strategic dependence of Afghanistan on Pakistan?
It does, and I hope that this time around we can actually get around to implementing the trilateral agreement much more rapidly. You know, the idea of Chabahar being developed to provide Afghanistan an alternate sea route was something which was discussed way back in 2003. And but then subsequently there were other developments that took place. There were sanctions on Iran. It became much more difficult. Iran started looking inwards and all the rest of it. But now that the situation has changed, I think that would become, if implemented quickly, along with the north-south transit corridor that is being talked about, the fact that India has already completed the Zaranj-Delaram road, I think that could be a game changer as far as Afghanistan's strategic outlook and approach to the sea is concerned.
Okay, all right. We need to take a break again at this point. We'll be back again in a bit. Stay with us. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the deepening ties between India and Afghanistan. Vivek, although both India and Afghanistan are victims of terrorism originating from Pakistan, is there anything common about the kind of terrorism the two countries face? Aren't the two terrorisms different in their origin as well as their objectives?
I think there is a pool of terrorists in Pakistan who are externally oriented, and they are manipulated by the Pakistani agencies, in particular the ISI. And these terrorists cooperate among themselves. So to say that there are two distinct elements there, I think is wrong. Second, the aim of the terrorists is to an extent the same. One, in Afghanistan, it is to destabilize. And second, it is to try to control the government. Now here, the aim of the terrorists is to destabilize India. But as far as the state of Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, it is to take it out of the Union and therefore to control it. So in that respect, the objectives and the methods are also the same, and so is the master manipulator.
Okay. Jayant, do you think that the US is interested in Afghanistan pivoting towards India, because at this point in time there's a lame duck government in Washington DC. New administration will not review Afghanistan policy till the middle of next year.
Right.
So to what extent is a US push also sort of cajoling India into doing what India is doing with Afghanistan?
Well, to tell you the truth, in the last 2 years, the US policy in Afghanistan has been a policy of holding on to the dispensation that they created post the presidential elections, maintain the national unity government at all cost, and basically a holding operation till the new administration comes in. Whether it's a hostile takeover, that is Donald Trump triumphs, or whether it's a friendly takeover, there is going to be a distinct change in US policy, but that would depend on a thoroughgoing review that is conducted. Basically, whatever the administration, the old engagement of the United States is not going to come back. But what the new administration might want to do different from what President Obama's administration has done is to try and give Afghanistan the wherewithal to fight its own wars and to stabilize itself, because the kind of army they have left in Afghanistan, the training that they have imparted is of good quality of the Special Operations Forces. But this is an army which is fighting with personal infantry weapons, bereft of any support systems like protected surface mobility. They are fighting without medevac, which is medical evacuation. When soldiers are wounded, they know that they are going to bleed to death. They don't have any weaponry that is heavy. They have no tanks. They have no artillery. This is not an army to sustain a state.
Why doesn't the US supply that equipment? Why is India jumping in to supply that equipment?
Exactly. So that is why India has been a little reticent in supply of equipment of the type that was requested in the past. And the helicopter gunships that we provided, which are not of Indian manufacture, is to shame Afghanistan's military partners, 46 of them who were fighting the war in Afghanistan for so many years, to do their duty, to do what they ought to do.
Look, what does this illustrate? What Jayant has said at last. It is a deep desire in all of Afghanistan's military partners not to create structures which would be harmful for Pakistan.
Exactly.
Therefore, I am not persuaded as yet that the change that we are seeing in the Americans encouraging India to do more by way of military supplies marks a long-term strategic shift in thinking. Correct. I would like to, as of now, I have my mind open to this, but I feel inclined to think that it is a temporary shift to put pressure on the Pakistanis to deliver on the Taliban, as well as not create any problems over the next few months.
Okay. Rakesh, if the US is going to pull out, it's going to need people to step in to support the and stabilize the government there. Now the question is, to what extent should India go in providing such support without getting entangled in the war in Afghanistan? Because there is a danger that, this is a slippery slope. Today it's helicopter gunships, tomorrow it will be artillery and tanks, and God alone knows what.
Well, I think one thing, it is important to remember that there are limits to what kind of military hardware we can provide. As I think it's common knowledge that our own dependence on imported hardware is very, very high. It is 70% of all the military hardware. And so even these helicopters, that the Mi-25s that have been provided, we don't manufacture them. The original equipment manufacturer is Russia in this particular case. So our ability, our howitzers, mortars, etc., there are limitations in terms of what our ordnance factories can produce. And if we are producing under license, then once again the OEM or the original equipment manufacturer may put in restrictions in terms of what we can provide. So I think there are limitations. This is a symbolic...
But is it all right to provide equipment that is manufactured by India? Within India?
I think so. But there are very clear limitations on what we can provide. There are just a few mortars and which we produce in our own ordnance factories. That kind of thing which we can.
Okay, quickly.
We can provide whatever we can. The bottom line is no military personnel should go to Afghanistan, leave alone for combat operations, even for training purposes. That will be going down the slippery slope.
Okay. Jayant, to what extent would India's this burgeoning defense engagement or security engagement in Afghanistan be affected by uncertainties governing the national unity government at Kabul? How would India's Afghan policy be impacted should Ashraf Ghani government face a crisis in the near future, which it is bound to face?
We should not be concerned so much about the vicissitudes of internal politics in Afghanistan, because they can unpredictably or predictably turn turbulent at any point of time. There is always surprises in store in dealing with a volatile situation there. So we should not predicate our policy on that, because there is a certain long-term dynamic to the Afghan-India relationship which we have seen develop over the past 15 years.
But it's all right to say we should not predicate it on uncertainties there, but
Right.
Vivek has been making this argument that this whole thing is tactical as far as the Ashraf Ghani government is concerned.
No. What has happened with the Ashraf Ghani government is that the Ashraf Ghani government has not learned from the mistakes of the previous government. It has learned from its own mistakes,
I would
which is
very
always
much
the
like
case.
to hope so.
Because when President Karzai came to India first, and in fact Vivek told me that story long time ago, that he said that India must have tactical relations with Afghanistan for obvious reasons. But the relationship developed in a very different manner thereafter. So whatever the change in Afghanistan, so long as Afghanistan has a government which is interested in protecting the independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity of Afghanistan, that government is bound to have good relations with India, because so far India has had an interest in Afghanistan in the development partnership. It is under duress in a way that we have responded positively to Afghanistan's recent request.
Last word to you.
Well, I think we should look upon this also as not in terms of domestic political turbulence, but building institutional linkages with the Afghan army. And the idea is that we are strengthening the institution of the Afghan army, irrespective of...
But what caution should we exercise?
Exactly the one that Vivek said, that we should not have Indian troops on the ground, and we should not be having Indians engaging in combat. We provide capacity building support, which means that we are training a number of Afghan army people in India, and limited amount of hardware.
One sentence. The real caution that we need to apply is to maintain our links with everyone in Afghanistan, not give any significant political actor the feeling that he's being neglected.
Okay, fair enough. We've run out of time. I'd like to thank Vivek, Katju, Rakesh, Sood, Jayant, Prasad for participating in this discussion. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week as usual. Until then, goodbye and thanks for watching India's World.